Some betrayals come wrapped in family obligation. Mine arrived through a text message at 7:47 a.m. You owe me $2,400 for rent. Transfer it today, or I'm telling everyone what kind of sister you really are. Three sentences that shattered the careful boundaries I'd spent 5 years building between success and family drama. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. My name is Zoe Martinez, and at 28, I had finally found peace in my corner office overlooking downtown Denver. The early morning mountain view from the 20th floor never got old, especially when I remembered the cramped studio apartment I'd lived in just 3 years ago. Back then, I was scrambling to make ends meet as a junior real estate analyst, drowning in student loans and surviving on ramen noodles. Now, as the founder of Altitude Real Estate Holdings, I owned 12 properties across the city. The irony wasn't lost on me that my sister Vanessa had no idea she'd been living in one of them for the past 8 months. The phone rang before I could fully process her text. Vanessa's name flashed on the screen, and against my better judgment, I answered. "Finally," she snapped without preamble. "Did you see my message?" "Good morning to you too, Vanessa. And yes, I saw it. What makes you think I owe you rent money?" "Don't play dumb, Zoe. You know exactly why." Her voice carried that familiar, entitled edge that had grated on me since childhood. "I'm struggling here, and you're living your fancy life downtown. Family helps family." I stared out at the bustling streets below, watching people hurried to their jobs, unaware that one conversation was about to upend everything I thought I knew about family loyalty. "Vanessa, when was the last time you asked how I built my business? When did you show any interest in my actual work or the sacrifices I made?" "Here we go with the victim complex," she sighed dramatically. "Look, I don't need your life story. I need $2,400. "And if I refuse?" The silence stretched long enough that I wondered if she'd hung up. Then her voice returned, colder than before.
"Then I guess the whole family will know how selfish you've become, how you've forgotten where you came from. Mom and Dad are already worried about how money has changed you. Uncle Carlos keeps asking why you never help family anymore." The threat was clear. Pay up or face a coordinated family guilt campaign. It was classic Vanessa, manipulate first, ask questions never. "I need to think about this," I said finally. "Think fast. My rent is due tomorrow, and I'm not covering it myself when I know you can afford to help." She hung up before I could respond. I sat in the sudden silence, watching clouds drift past my window, and felt something cold and calculating settle in my chest. Vanessa wanted to play games with family obligation and financial leverage. She had no idea she just challenged someone who held all the cards. I pulled up my property management software and navigated to Summit View Apartments. There it was, Unit 4B, tenant Vanessa Martinez. Lease signed 8 months ago. Monthly rent, $2,400. Payment history, 2 late payments in the past 6 months, multiple noise complaints from neighbors, and a recent warning about unauthorized pets. My phone buzzed with another text from Vanessa. "Just so you know, I already told Mom you'd probably help. Don't make me look like a liar." I screenshot the message and added it to a folder I'd started months ago. Vanessa's mounting demands for money, her assumptions about my success, her increasing hostility when I didn't immediately comply. I'd been documenting it all, though I wasn't sure why. Now I knew why. Over the next hour, I received 3 more texts. The first from my mother, Gloria. "Honey, Vanessa mentioned you might help with her rent situation. That's so generous of you. Family looking out for family." The second from my cousin, Digo. "Heard you're doing well enough to help Van with rent. Good for you for stepping up." The third from Vanessa herself. "Mom's proud of you for helping. Don't ruin it now." Each message was a masterpiece of manipulation, building a narrative where I'd already agreed to something I'd never committed to. They were boxing me in, creating social pressure and family expectations that would make refusals seem cruel and selfish. But as I read through the messages again, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years: genuine excitement. Not anxiety, not dread, but anticipation. For the first time since building my business, I had the perfect opportunity to set the record straight about who I really was and what I'd actually accomplished. Vanessa thought she was pressuring her successful sister into paying her bills. She had no idea she was demanding rent money from her landlord. I pulled up my property management software and started planning. This revelation deserved perfect timing and maximum impact. My sister wanted to involve the whole family in her narrative about my obligations to her. Fine, the whole family could witness the truth. I picked up my phone and typed a response to Vanessa. "You're right. We should definitely discuss this face-to-face. Family dinner this Saturday. I'll cook." Her reply came within minutes. "Finally, yes, I'll be there. And bring your checkbook." I smiled, saving the screenshot with the others. Saturday couldn't come fast enough.
3 years ago, I was living paycheck to paycheck in a 400-square-foot studio apartment with water stains on the ceiling and neighbors who thought 2 a.m. was prime karaoke time. The transformation hadn't happened overnight, despite what my family believed. Every dollar of my current success had been earned through calculated risks, sleepless nights, and a determination that bordered on obsession. It started with a foreclosed duplex in a questionable neighborhood. I'd saved every penny from my analyst salary for 2 years, living on instant noodles and walking to work to avoid bus fare. The duplex cost $180,000, money I didn't have, but I convinced a private lender to finance it with my business plan and sheer desperation as collateral. I spent 6 months renovating that duplex myself. YouTube became my university, teaching me everything from plumbing basics to hardwood floor installation. My hands were permanently stained with paint and calloused from construction work. I'd finish my day job at 6 p.m., then work on the property until midnight, fueled by gas station coffee and the vision of something bigger. When I finally rented out both units, the cash flow was tight but positive. More importantly, I'd proven to myself that I could see potential where others saw problems. That duplex became the foundation of everything that followed. The second property came 8 months later, another foreclosure, this time a small apartment building with 4 units. The seller was motivated, the price was right, and I'd learned enough from the duplex to spot both opportunities and red flags. I used the equity from my first property to secure financing for the second. By year 2, I owned 5 properties. By year 3, 12 properties, generating enough passive income to quit my analyst job and focus entirely on real estate investment. I'd founded Altitude Real Estate Holdings, hired a property management team, and moved into the downtown penthouse that had become a symbol of how far I'd come. But here's what my family never knew. I'd kept my success deliberately quiet. The decision wasn't born from modesty, it was pure self-preservation. Growing up in the Martinez household meant growing up with the understanding that any success belonged to the family collective. When cousin Diego got his first decent job, suddenly everyone had opinions about how he should spend his money. When Aunt Isabel inherited money from her mother, it became a family discussion about who needed help and how much everyone deserved. I'd watched this pattern my entire life. Success made you a target for everyone else's problems, expectations, and entitlement. So when my real estate investments started paying off, I made a conscious choice to keep quiet about the extent of my wealth. I drove a nice but not flashy car, a 3-year-old Honda Accord that looked successful without screaming money. I dressed well, but shopped at department stores rather than designer boutiques. When family asked about my work, I gave vague answers about doing well in real estate, without specifics about ownership versus employment. My downtown apartment was the one indulgence I couldn't hide, but I'd told everyone I was renting it from a friend who gave me a good deal. The lie came easily, because the alternative, explaining that I owned a penthouse worth $800,000, would have opened floodgates I wasn't ready to face. Vanessa, meanwhile, had chosen a completely different path through life. After dropping out of college junior year to find herself, she'd bounced between jobs, relationships, and apartments with impressive consistency.
She worked at a marketing agency downtown, a position she'd held for almost 2 years, a personal record. Her social media painted a picture of someone living their best life: expensive dinners, weekend trips, designer clothes, and enough nights out to fund a small country's GDP. What she hadn't posted about were the maxed out credit cards, the car repossession last year, or the fact that she'd borrowed money from our parents 3 times in the past 18 months. I knew about these things because Mom had mentioned them during our weekly phone calls, always with a worried tone and subtle hints that maybe I could help. I'd helped before. Small amounts, 500 here, 300 there, always framed as loans that were never repaid. Each time, Vanessa treated the money like a gift she deserved rather than assistance she'd requested. Each time, the gratitude lasted exactly as long as it took to spend the cash. But this morning's demand was different. $2,400 wasn't a small favor between sisters. It was more than many people made in a month. More telling was her assumption that I'd pay it, her casual dismissal of my right to refuse, and her immediate escalation to family-wide manipulation. The most infuriating part? She was demanding rent money for an apartment I owned. I'd purchased Summit View Apartments 14 months ago from a developer who'd overextended himself during construction. The building was 90% complete, but hemorrhaging money due to cost overruns and delays. I got it for 60 cents on the dollar and spent 3 months finishing the construction and marketing the units. When Vanessa applied to live there, she went through my property management company like any other tenant. Kevin Thompson, my property manager, handled the application process. I'd seen her name on the list but didn't intervene. She qualified financially, barely, and I believed in keeping business and family separate. That philosophy had worked well until this morning, when family and business collided in the most ironic way possible. As I sat in my office reviewing the lease agreement Vanessa had signed 8 months ago, I couldn't help but appreciate the cosmic justice of the situation. Every month, she wrote a rent check that ultimately ended up in my bank account. Every complaint she'd made about the building, the noise from construction next door, the slow elevator, the lack of visitor parking, had been forwarded to me as the owner. I'd even approved the pet fee waiver when she'd adopted a cat without permission, though she'd never known the decision came from me. Now she wanted me to pay her rent. She was essentially asking me to pay myself, using family guilt as leverage, completely unaware that I held every card in the deck. My phone buzzed with another text from Mom. "Vanessa seems really stressed about money lately. It's so nice that you can help her out. Dad and I are proud of how successful you've become." I stared at the message, feeling the familiar weight of family expectations. They were proud of my success, but had no idea what that success actually entailed. They saw the surface, the nice apartment, the business clothes, the ability to help family members, without understanding the work, risk, and sacrifice that had built the foundation. More frustrating was their assumption that my success created an obligation to solve everyone else's problems, as if working 18-hour days and risking everything I had somehow made me responsible for Vanessa's poor financial choices. But as I looked out at the Denver skyline, something shifted in my perspective. This situation wasn't just a family drama or a financial shakedown. It was an opportunity to set the record straight about who I was, what I'd built, and what I would and wouldn't accept from people who claimed to love me. Saturday's dinner wouldn't just be about revealing that I owned Vanessa's building. It would be about establishing boundaries that should have been set years ago. I opened my laptop and started typing an email to Kevin Thompson. "Kevin, I need to discuss the tenant in Unit 4B at Summit View. We can meet tomorrow morning. There's a situation developing that requires my direct involvement." The game was officially in motion. By Thursday morning, what had started as Vanessa's personal demand had evolved into a full-scale family intervention. My phone buzzed constantly with messages from relatives I hadn't heard from in months, all suddenly concerned about family unity and my moral obligations as the successful one. The first call came from my father, Carlos, at 8:15 a.m. Dad was a man of few words, which made his 40-minute lecture about family responsibility particularly jarring. Mija, he began, using the childhood nickname that usually softened my defenses. Your mother and I raised you to look out for your sister. Vanessa's going through a rough patch, and family helps family. Dad, when did helping family become paying someone else's rent indefinitely? I asked, pulling into my office parking garage. It's not about the money, Zoe. It's about showing you care. Vanessa feels like you've forgotten where you came from. There it was, the guilt card wrapped in concern about my character. I haven't forgotten anything, Dad. I remember working 2 jobs to pay for college while Vanessa partied. I remember eating ramen for months to save money while she bought designer purses. I remember... That's the past, he interrupted. This is about now, about being the person we raised you to be. The conversation continued in circles for 20 more minutes, with Dad painting my refusal to pay Vanessa's rent as evidence of moral decay brought on by financial success. By the time I hung up, I felt emotionally drained and manipulated in ways that were both familiar and infuriating. The second wave came from my Aunt Isabel, who called during my lunch break with information that made my blood boil. Zoe, honey, I heard about Vanessa's situation. It's so generous of you to help, but I wanted you to know that she's been talking to everyone about how much you're making now. What exactly has she been saying? Well, she mentioned that you own multiple properties and that your business is worth millions. She even said you bought that penthouse outright with cash. I nearly choked on my salad. She said what? Oh dear, was I not supposed to mention that? She made it sound like common knowledge. She's been telling everyone at church that her sister is practically a real estate mogul. My carefully constructed privacy had been obliterated by Vanessa's need to justify her demands for money. She'd taken the few details she'd pieced together and inflated them into a narrative that painted me as wealthy enough to single-handedly solve everyone's financial problems. Aunt Isabel, most of what Vanessa said isn't accurate. I'm doing well, but I'm not... Oh, honey, you don't need to be modest with me. Vanessa showed us pictures of your apartment. It's gorgeous. And that car you drove to Easter dinner was clearly expensive. There's no shame in success. I realized that any denial would sound like false modesty. Vanessa had already shaped the narrative, and my family had accepted it as truth. Worse, they'd used it to justify their expectations of what I owed them. The third call came from my cousin Diego, Vanessa's former boyfriend from high school, who somehow still inserted himself into family drama despite being 30 years old and living in his mother's basement. Yo, Zoe, what's this I hear about you not wanting to help Van with rent? He demanded without preamble. Hello to you too, Diego. And it's not that I don't want to help, it's that I question whether paying someone's rent indefinitely is actually helping them. Come on, man. She's family. And you've got it like that now, right? Vanessa said you're pulling in serious money. Vanessa says a lot of things. Look, I'm not trying to get in your business, but Van's been stressed about this rent thing for weeks. She's been crying to your mom about it. You really gonna let your sister get evicted when you could just write a check? The eviction threat was new information, and I made a mental note to verify it with my property manager. But Diego's call revealed something more troubling. Vanessa had been building this narrative for weeks, positioning herself as a victim of circumstances while painting me as the heartless sister who could solve everything but chose not to.
By Thursday evening, my phone had become a battlefield. Text messages arrived in rapid succession from various family members, each adding their voice to the chorus demanding I step up and pay Vanessa's rent. From my mother. Your sister called me crying today. She's really struggling, Zoe. I know you're busy with work, but family comes first. From Aunt Patricia. I heard about Vanessa's situation. In our family, we've always taken care of each other. Your grandmother would be disappointed if she knew you were letting your sister suffer. From cousin Jason. Van told me you're thinking about helping with rent. That's cool of you. She's been through a lot lately with the breakup and everything. Each message assumed I'd already agreed to help, creating a social reality where refusing would make me the villain in everyone else's story. The manipulation was masterful in its coordination. Clearly, Vanessa had been busy building her case for weeks. The final straw came Friday morning when I arrived at work to find an email from someone I barely knew. Carmen Rodriguez, a family friend who cleaned our church and apparently felt qualified to lecture me about Christian charity. Dear Zoe, the email began, I heard from your mother about your sister's rental situation. As someone who has watched your family grow up, I wanted to encourage you to remember that blessed are those who help others in their time of need. Your success is a gift from God, meant to be shared with those less fortunate. The email continued for 3 paragraphs, quoting scripture and painting my potential refusal as not just heartless, but sinful. Carmen had never worked a day in real estate, never risked her savings on a property investment, never sacrificed years of her life building something from nothing. But somehow, she felt entitled to lecture me about how to spend my money. I forwarded the email to my friend and occasional business mentor, Priya Patel, a lawyer who'd helped me structure my real estate investments. Her response was immediate and brutally honest. Zoe, this is emotional manipulation 101. They're creating public pressure to force compliance with unreasonable demands. Document everything. These communications could be useful if this escalates further. Also, have you considered that your sister might be in violation of her lease terms? Subletting rooms, unauthorized occupants, late payments. Just saying. Priya's message sparked an idea. I called Kevin Thompson immediately. Kevin, I need you to pull the complete file on Unit 4B at Summit View. Payment history, maintenance requests, any lease violations, neighbor complaints, everything. Is there a problem with that tenant? He asked. Potentially. I need to understand the full situation before I make any decisions about renewals or enforcement. I'll have the file ready in an hour. As I waited for Kevin's report, I realized that Vanessa's campaign to pressure me into paying her rent had revealed something crucial. She'd been lying to everyone about her circumstances, inflating my wealth to justify her demands, and manipulating family relationships to achieve her goals. The irony was perfect. While orchestrating a family-wide guilt trip about my moral obligations to her, she had no idea she was targeting the one person who could end her housing situation with a single phone call. Saturday's dinner was going to be more interesting than anyone anticipated. My phone buzzed with one final message from Vanessa. Can't wait for dinner tomorrow. Mom said you're making your famous enchiladas. Hope you're bringing good news about the rent situation. I smiled as I typed my response. Oh, I'm definitely bringing news about your rent situation. You're going to be very surprised. Friday afternoon brought Kevin Thompson's report, and it was even more damning than I'd anticipated. As I sat in my office reviewing the thick file on Unit 4B, a picture emerged of a tenant who had treated my property like her personal playground while demanding I subsidize her lifestyle. Kevin, walk me through this payment history, I said, spreading the documents across my conference table. Well, she's technically current on rent, but barely, Kevin began, settling into the chair across from me. She's been late 4 times in 8 months. The first time was just 2 days, but the pattern escalated. Last month, she was 12 days late and only paid after I left a notice on her door. What about the complaints from other tenants? Kevin flipped through his notes. Multiple noise complaints from Units 4A and 4C, loud parties on weeknights, music until 2 a.m., and what sounds like multiple people living in the unit despite her lease being for single occupancy. I raised an eyebrow. Unauthorized occupants? That's my suspicion. The neighbor in 4A mentioned seeing different people coming and going at all hours, and the utility usage is significantly higher than comparable single occupancy units. But we haven't caught her in the act yet. Anything else? Kevin consulted his file again. The unauthorized pet situation you approved the waiver for? Turns out it's not just one cat. The maintenance team found evidence of at least 2 cats during the routine filter change last month. Also, she's made several modification requests that we've denied. Painting walls, installing shelving, replacing light fixtures. She seemed annoyed that we wouldn't let her customize her rental. The picture was clear. Vanessa treated the apartment like she owned it, bent rules whenever convenient, and showed little respect for the property or other tenants. Meanwhile, she was demanding that I pay the rent for a place where she was likely violating multiple lease terms. Kevin, I need you to do something discreet for me. Next week, conduct a routine inspection of Unit 4B. Full documentation with photos. If we find lease violations, I want everything properly documented. Any particular interest in this unit? I paused, weighing how much to reveal. Let's just say the tenant has made some unrealistic demands regarding her rent obligations, and I want to understand the full scope of our landlord-tenant relationship. That afternoon, I drove to Summit View Apartments for my own reconnaissance mission. I'd been to the building many times during construction and renovation, but I'd never spent time observing the day-to-day operations as a resident would experience them. The building was one of my prouder investments, a converted warehouse in the trendy Capitol Hill neighborhood, featuring exposed brick walls, high ceilings, and modern amenities. I'd spent considerable money on soundproofing between units, security systems, and quality finishes. The monthly rent of $2,400 was competitive for the area, especially considering the building's amenities and location. I parked across the street and waited. Within 30 minutes, I watched Vanessa return from work, dressed in designer clothes that probably cost more than most people's monthly food budget. She struggled with several shopping bags. Apparently, her financial crisis hadn't prevented a lunchtime spending spree. More interesting was what happened 20 minutes later. A young man I didn't recognize emerged from the building's entrance, clearly coming from the direction of Vanessa's unit. He was followed 15 minutes later by a woman about Vanessa's age, also unfamiliar. Both had keys and the comfortable familiarity of people who belonged there. I made notes about the timing and took discreet photos. If Vanessa was subletting rooms or housing unauthorized occupants, she was violating her lease in ways that could justify immediate eviction. The irony was delicious. While demanding I pay her rent, she was potentially breaking the very lease agreement she wanted me to fund.
My phone buzzed with a text from Vanessa. BTW, I invited Mom and Dad to dinner tomorrow. Hope that's okay. Figured they should be there when we discuss the rent arrangement. The manipulation continued. She'd turned my dinner invitation into a family meeting about our rent arrangement, complete with parental witnesses to ensure I couldn't back out gracefully. She was either supremely confident in her guilt tactics or completely oblivious to how badly she was about to miscalculate. I spent Friday evening researching Vanessa's social media presence, looking for evidence of her true financial situation. What I found was both predictable and infuriating. Her Instagram told a story of constant luxury, expensive dinners at trendy restaurants, weekend trips to Aspen and Vail, designer purses and shoes, professional manicures and salon visits. The timestamp showed this lifestyle had continued right up through the past week, even as she claimed financial desperation to our family. More damning were the posts about her amazing downtown apartment where she hosted epic wine nights and Sunday brunches with the crew. The photos showed groups of people clearly comfortable in the space, suggesting the unauthorized occupants I'd observed weren't just occasional guests. One post from 3 weeks ago was particularly revealing. A picture of Vanessa holding up a lease renewal notice with the caption, rent going up again? Good thing I've got the best sister ever who's going to help me out. Family first. She'd been planning this shakedown for weeks, using social media to build a public narrative about my obligation to help her. The post had dozens of likes and comments from family members and friends, all praising her for having such a generous sister and encouraging her to let family take care of family. I screenshotted everything, building a comprehensive file of evidence that painted a picture completely at odds with the struggling victim narrative she had presented to our parents.
Saturday morning, I met with Priya at a coffee shop downtown to review my options and strategy. Legally, you have grounds for lease termination based on the unauthorized occupants alone, she confirmed after reviewing Kevin's report and my photos. The late payment pattern strengthens your position, and if the inspection reveals additional violations, she'd have virtually no recourse. But I'm not looking to evict her immediately. I want her to understand the reality of her situation before she destroys family relationships over money she thinks I owe her. Priya smiled. You want her to realize she's been demanding rent money from her own landlord while simultaneously violating the lease agreement that gives her the right to live there in the first place. Exactly. I want her to understand that her financial problems aren't my responsibility, especially when she's creating them through poor choices and irresponsible behavior. What about the family pressure campaign? That ends tonight. Once everyone understands the real dynamic here, that Vanessa has been lying about her circumstances while demanding money from the person who actually owns her apartment, the manipulation stops working. As I drove home to prepare for dinner, I felt a strange sense of anticipation. For years, I'd allowed family guilt and obligation to override my better judgment. I'd enabled Vanessa's irresponsible behavior by providing financial safety nets she'd never asked for and certainly never appreciated. Tonight, the enabling ended. Tonight, everyone would learn that success wasn't luck or favoritism, it was the result of hard work, smart decisions, and personal responsibility. And anyone who wanted to benefit from my success would need to show the same respect for boundaries and accountability that I demanded from myself. I stopped at the grocery store to buy ingredients for Mom's favorite enchiladas. If this was going to be a family dinner to remember, I might as well make sure the food was perfect. Everything else was about to get very interesting. My phone buzzed with one last message from Vanessa. So excited for tonight. Mom said you sounded mysterious about the rent thing. I love surprises. I smiled as I put my phone away. She was going to get a surprise, all right. Just not the one she was expecting.
Saturday morning arrived with Kevin's inspection report, and the findings were far worse than I'd anticipated. As I reviewed the documented evidence over my coffee, I realized Vanessa hadn't just been bending lease rules, she'd been running a completely unauthorized operation out of my property. The inspection revealed significant violations, Kevin explained during our emergency phone call. 3 unauthorized occupants, including what appears to be a full-time subletting arrangement. The tenant in question has converted the living room into a makeshift bedroom and is clearly charging rent to multiple people. My stomach dropped. She's subletting rooms without permission? That's exactly what she's doing. We found personal belongings for at least 4 different people, multiple sets of keys, and a rent collection chart posted on the refrigerator. She's charging $800 per person for room shares in what's supposed to be a single occupancy unit. I did the math quickly. Vanessa was collecting $2,400 per month from her illegal subtenants, exactly the amount of rent she owed me, and exactly the amount she was demanding I pay for her. She wasn't struggling financially. She was running an unauthorized rental business out of my property while trying to get me to cover her actual lease obligations. Kevin, I need copies of everything. Photos, documentation, the neighbor complaints, utility records showing excessive usage, all of it. And I want you to calculate the total damages to the unit. Already working on it. Should I proceed with formal lease violation notices? Not yet. I want to handle this personally first, but prepare the paperwork in case I need it. After hanging up, I spent the next 2 hours conducting my own digital investigation into Vanessa's activities. What I discovered painted a picture of someone who had turned manipulation and deception into an art form. Her Venmo transactions, which she'd foolishly kept public, showed regular payments from 4 different people with memo lines like Capitol Hill room rent and monthly housing payment. The dates aligned perfectly with the first of each month, confirming Kevin's suspicion about the subletting arrangement. More damaging were her social media posts from the past few months, which I'd initially missed during my cursory review. She'd been actively advertising room shares in an amazing downtown building on various Facebook housing groups, describing amenities that belonged to the building while omitting the fact that she was subletting without authorization. One post from 6 weeks ago was particularly brazen. Beautiful room available in luxury Capitol Hill apartment building. $800 a month includes utilities, gym access, rooftop terrace, and the coolest roommate ever. Me. Perfect for young professionals. DM for details. The responses revealed she'd been running this operation for months, with dozens of inquiries and several completed transactions. She'd essentially turned my property into an illegal boarding house while simultaneously building a narrative about financial hardship to extract money from me. But the most shocking discovery came when I cross-referenced her social media check-ins with her Venmo payments. For the past 3 months, while collecting $2,400 monthly from her subtenants, Vanessa had been spending an average of $3,200 a month on restaurants, shopping, travel, and entertainment.
She wasn't just financially irresponsible. She was living beyond her means, using money from her illegal rental scheme, then demanding I cover her actual obligations when her overspending left her short. My phone rang with a call from an unknown number. Against my better judgment, I answered. "Hi, is this Zoe Martinez?" asked a young woman's voice. "Yes, who's calling?" "My name is Jessica. I'm one of Vanessa's roommates at Summit View Apartments. I got your number from her phone. We need to talk." My heart rate spiked. "What about?" "Look, I don't know what's going on between you and Van, but she's been telling us that you own our building and that you're trying to evict everyone because you don't like her. She said we might all have to move out because of some family drama." I sat down hard. Vanessa had told her subtenants that I owned the building. She knew. She'd known all along that I was her landlord, and she'd still demanded I pay her rent while running an illegal operation out of my property. "Jessica, I need to ask you something important. How long have you been living in that apartment?" "About 4 months. Van said she got permission from the landlord to have roommates because she couldn't afford the rent on her own. We each pay her $800 plus utilities." "Did you sign a lease or any kind of rental agreement?" "Just a simple roommate agreement with Van. She said it wasn't necessary to involve the landlord since she was the primary tenant." "Why are you asking these questions?" The manipulation was even deeper than I'd realized. Vanessa had been lying to her subtenants about having permission for the arrangement, collecting their money under false pretenses, then demanding I pay the rent she was supposed to cover with their payments. "Jessica, I need to ask you something important. Can you meet me in person? There are some things about your housing situation that you need to know." "Is Van in trouble? She's been really stressed lately, talking about family problems and money issues. She said her sister might help with rent, but that it was complicated." "It's very complicated," I agreed, "but not in the way she's told you. Can you meet me tomorrow morning? And Jessica, don't mention this conversation to Vanessa. Not yet." After arranging to meet Jessica at a coffee shop Sunday morning, I sat in my apartment trying to process the full scope of Vanessa's deception. She'd known I owned her building. She'd been running an illegal subletting operation. She'd been lying to her subtenants about having permission for the arrangement. She'd been lying to our family about her financial situation. And through it all, she'd been demanding I pay rent for a property I owned while she collected illegal rental income from unauthorized occupants. The audacity was breathtaking. But what infuriated me most was the realization that her entire victim narrative, the financial struggles, the inability to pay rent, the need for family help, was a complete fabrication designed to extract money from me while she profited from violating my property lease. My phone buzzed with a text from Mom. "Looking forward to dinner tonight, mija. Your father and I are so proud of how you're helping your sister. Family is everything." I stared at the message, feeling a mix of anger and sadness. My parents' pride was based on a lie. Their understanding of the situation was completely backwards. They thought they were witnessing family generosity when they were actually about to see the exposure of family betrayal. Another text arrived.
This one from Vanessa. Quick question, should I bring anything tonight besides my winning personality? Also, should I invite my roommates? They've been dying to meet my famous real estate mogul sister. She was still playing games even as her entire house of cards was about to collapse. The suggestion about inviting her roommates was particularly galling. She wanted to parade her illegal subtenants in front of me, probably as some kind of power play to show how many people would be affected if I didn't cooperate with her demands. I typed my response carefully. Just bring yourself, Vanessa. Tonight is going to be about family only. We have a lot to discuss about your housing situation. As I began preparing ingredients for dinner, I realized that tonight wouldn't just be about exposing Vanessa's lies to our parents. It would be about finally setting boundaries that should have been established years ago and making it clear that my success didn't make me responsible for enabling other people's poor choices. The reckoning was hours away, and I was ready.
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. The full irony of my situation hit me as I stood in my kitchen preparing enchiladas for the dinner that would change everything. 14 months ago, I'd purchased Summit View Apartments as a strategic investment, never imagining that my own sister would become the tenant from hell while simultaneously demanding I fund her lifestyle. The building's acquisition had been one of my prouder business moments. The developer, Marcus Sterling, had overextended himself during the construction phase, pouring money into high-end finishes and amenities while underestimating the total costs. By the time the project was 80% complete, he was hemorrhaging cash and facing bankruptcy. I'd been tracking the property for months through my industry connections. The location was perfect. Capitol Hill was gentrifying rapidly, and the building offered the kind of modern luxury that young professionals craved. When Marcus finally admitted defeat and put the property on the market, I was ready with a cash offer that saved him from complete financial ruin. The purchase price was $3.2 million for a building that would have cost $5 million to develop from scratch. I'd used the equity from my smaller properties as collateral and taken on significant debt, but the numbers worked. Even at 85% occupancy, the building would generate enough cash flow to service the mortgage and provide steady returns. The renovation and completion phase had been intensive. I'd worked closely with contractors to finish the remaining units, upgrade the security system, and add the rooftop terrace that became one of the building's most attractive features. I'd even splurged on high-end appliances and custom lighting fixtures. The unit was designed to attract responsible professionals who would appreciate quality and maintain the property appropriately. When applications started coming in, I'd insisted on thorough screening. Credit checks, employment verification, references from previous landlords. I wanted tenants who would treat my investment with respect. Kevin Thompson, my property manager, handled the day-to-day operations, but I remained involved in major decisions. Vanessa's application had crossed my desk on a busy Tuesday in September. I'd seen her name and felt a moment of surprise, but I'd made a deliberate decision to treat her like any other applicant. Her credit score was marginal, 650, just above our minimum requirement. Her income qualified her for the rent, but barely. She'd listed our parents as emergency contacts and provided references from 2 previous landlords. What I hadn't known at the time was that one of those landlord references was fabricated. I discovered this yesterday when I called the number listed for her previous apartment in Boulder. The person who answered had never heard of Vanessa Martinez and had never managed rental properties. She'd lied on her application to qualify for my apartment, then turned around and demanded I pay the rent for a place she obtained through deception. The approval process had been Kevin's call, and he'd recommended accepting her application based on the income verification and references. I'd signed off on it, telling myself that keeping business and family separate was the professional thing to do. For the first few months, Vanessa had been a model tenant. Rent paid on time, no complaints, no maintenance requests beyond standard items. I'd congratulated myself on maintaining appropriate boundaries and proving that family relationships didn't have to complicate business decisions. The first sign of trouble came in month 3 when Kevin mentioned a noise complaint from the neighboring unit. Then came the late payment in month 4.
By month 6, it was clear that Unit 4B was becoming a problem property, but I'd instructed Kevin to handle it through normal channels without special treatment. Looking back, I realized that Vanessa's transformation from responsible tenant to problem renter coincided with her realization that I was the building owner. She'd never explicitly told me she knew, but her increasingly casual attitude toward lease compliance suggested she thought family connection would protect her from consequences. The subletting scheme had started around month 5, based on the utility usage patterns Kevin had tracked. Vanessa had likely realized that her $2,400 rent was beyond her actual means and decided to solve the problem by illegally renting space to others. Instead of downsizing to an affordable apartment, she'd chosen to stay in luxury accommodations by passing the cost to unsuspecting subtenants.
What made her behavior even more galling was the realization that she'd been deliberately violating our lease agreement while building a public narrative about my moral obligation to help her. She'd been collecting $2,400 monthly from her illegal subtenants, then spending $3,200 on personal expenses, creating an artificial shortage that she expected me to cover. The financial calculation was stunning in its selfishness. Rather than live within her means, she'd chosen to exploit both her subtenants and her family relationship to maintain a lifestyle she couldn't afford. As I layered cheese over the enchiladas, my phone rang. The caller ID showed Jessica's number. "Zoe, I'm sorry to bother you again, but something weird happened. Van just called me and said there might be a change in our housing situation. She was asking if I could pay next month's rent early, like by Monday? Did she say why? She said there might be some family issues that affect our lease and that having cash on hand would help with negotiations. She also asked if I knew anyone else looking for a room, which is weird because we're already pretty crowded." I felt my anger spike. Even knowing that tonight would expose her lies, Vanessa was still trying to extract more money from her victims. She was treating Jessica and the other subtenants like an ATM, squeezing them for additional cash to fund whatever scheme she had planned next. "Jessica, whatever Vanessa has told you about your housing situation, I need you to know that your current arrangement isn't legally valid. You don't have tenant rights in that apartment because your sublease agreement was never authorized." What does that mean? It means you're essentially paying rent to someone who doesn't have the right to rent space to you. If she's evicted or leaves, you have no legal protection. The silence on the other end stretched long enough that I wondered if the call had dropped. "Are you telling me that Van has been lying to us this whole time?" Jessica finally asked. "I'm telling you that your housing situation is much more complicated than you've been led to believe. We should definitely meet tomorrow morning so I can explain everything properly." After hanging up, I realized that Vanessa's deception extended far beyond just lying to family members about her circumstances. She'd been systematically deceiving vulnerable people who needed housing, collecting their money under false pretenses, and putting them at risk of sudden displacement. The young professionals living in Unit 4B thought they had stable housing arrangements. They'd planned their budgets around $800 monthly rent payments. They'd established routines around what they believed was their legitimate home. Vanessa's lies had created a situation where 4 innocent people could find themselves homeless with no legal recourse. As I layered cheese over the enchiladas, my resolve crystallized completely. Tonight wasn't just about exposing Vanessa's manipulation of our family dynamics. It was about protecting the people she'd been exploiting and ensuring that my property was managed with the integrity and professionalism it deserved. The timer showed 2 hours until my parents would arrive for what they thought was a simple family dinner. They had no idea they were about to witness the complete dismantling of my younger daughter's carefully constructed web of lies. I opened a bottle of wine to let it breathe, then sat down to review my evidence one final time. Property records, lease agreements, inspection photos, social media screenshots, financial transactions, everything needed to prove that Vanessa had turned family manipulation into a criminal enterprise. My phone buzzed with a text from Vanessa. "Just left the grocery store with flowers for dinner. Can't wait to celebrate." She was still confident that tonight would end with me agreeing to pay her rent. She had no idea that it would end with her facing the consequences of months of lies, manipulation, and illegal activity.
The countdown to revelation had begun.
At 5:30 p.m., my penthouse apartment was transformed into what would become the most important family gathering in Martina's history. I'd arranged the dining room table with calculated precision, every chair positioned to ensure maximum impact when the truth finally emerged. My parents would sit facing the wall-mounted television where I'd prepared a presentation that would destroy Vanessa's narrative completely. Vanessa herself would sit directly across from me, close enough that I could watch every micro-expression as her world collapsed. The lighting was perfect, the wine was breathing, and the enchiladas were filling the apartment with the comforting aroma of childhood memories. But this wasn't about comfort. This was about justice. My phone buzzed with updates from my various sources throughout the afternoon. Kevin had completed his damage assessment, $8,400 in repairs needed for Unit 4B, including hardwood floor refinishing, carpet replacement, and professional cleaning to address pet damage. The security deposit of $2,400 wouldn't even cover half the restoration costs. More disturbing was the information I'd gathered about Vanessa's subtenants. Through careful questioning during my conversation with Jessica, I'd learned that each of the 4 unauthorized occupants had paid first month rent plus a $500 security deposit to Vanessa. She'd collected $11,600 in upfront payments from people who had no legal right to live in my property. Jessica had also revealed that Vanessa had been advertising additional rooms, trying to pack even more people into the one-bedroom unit. She'd apparently told potential renters that she was in negotiations to expand the living space, which I now understood meant she was planning to use my rent payment to secure additional apartments that she could sublet illegally. The scope of her scheme was staggering. This wasn't just about avoiding personal responsibility for rent, it was about building an illegal rental empire using my properties as the foundation, funded by money she was demanding from me under false pretenses. At 6 p.m. sharp, my parents arrived. Dad carried a bottle of wine and wore his best button-down shirt, the one he reserved for important family occasions. Mom had brought homemade flan, my childhood favorite dessert, and was beaming with pride about what she believed was my generous spirit. "Mija, the apartment smells incredible," Mom said, hugging me tightly, "just like when you were little and helped me cook for Sunday dinners." "Your sister is lucky to have you," Dad added, patting my shoulder with genuine affection. "Family taking care of family. This is what your mother and I always hoped for." Their sincerity was heartbreaking. They genuinely believed they were witnessing a beautiful moment of sibling support when they were actually about to discover that one daughter had been systematically manipulating and lying to everyone she claimed to love. Vanessa arrived 20 minutes late, a habit that had always annoyed me, but which tonight felt particularly disrespectful given the circumstances. She swept into my apartment wearing a designer dress I recognized from her Instagram posts, probably cost $400. Another example of her twisted priorities. Sorry, she called out cheerfully, presenting me with an expensive bouquet of flowers. Traffic was crazy and I had to stop by my place to grab something. She pulled out a manila folder with a triumphant smile. "I brought the lease agreement for my apartment so you can see exactly what we're dealing with. Thought it might help you understand the situation better." The audacity was breathtaking. She was about to show me my own lease agreement, expecting me to study rental terms I personally approved for a property I owned to help me understand why I should pay her obligations. "That's very thoughtful," I said, accepting the folder. "I'm definitely interested in reviewing your housing situation in detail." As we settled around the dinner table, I felt a strange calm descend over me. For months, I had been managing family pressure and guilt about not doing enough to help Vanessa. Tonight, that pressure would evaporate completely when everyone understood the true dynamics of our relationship. "So," Mom began as I served the enchiladas, "Vanessa told us you've been discussing her rent situation. It's so wonderful that you're able to help. When your father and I were young, we dreamed of having enough success to take care of family like this."
"It really shows your character," Dad added. "Success can change people, but you've stayed true to your values." I glanced at Vanessa, who was gluing with satisfaction at our parents' praise for my supposed generosity. She caught my eye and winked, as if we were co-conspirators in some delightful scheme. "Actually," I said carefully, "I think there are some misunderstandings about the situation that we should clear up before we go any further." Vanessa's smile faltered slightly. "What kind of misunderstandings?" "Well, for starters, I think everyone should understand exactly what kind of help you've been requesting from me and why." I stood up and walked to my laptop, which I'd connected to the television earlier. "I've prepared a little presentation that I think will clarify things for everyone." "A presentation?" Mom asked, confused. "Honey, this is just family dinner." "This is definitely about family," I agreed, clicking to the first slide. "It's about honesty, responsibility, and the difference between actual hardship and manufactured crisis." The first slide displayed a simple title: "The Truth About Vanessa's Housing Situation." Vanessa's face went pale. "Zoe, what are you doing?" "I'm doing exactly what you asked me to do. You wanted to discuss your rent situation with the whole family present. You wanted me to understand your housing arrangement. You wanted transparency about money and obligations." I clicked to the next slide, which showed a photo of Summit View Apartments. "So let's start with transparency. Vanessa, would you like to tell Mom and Dad about your relationship with this building?" The silence that followed was deafening. Vanessa stared at the screen, her mouth opening and closing like a fish gasping for air. "I don't understand," Dad said slowly. "What does this building have to do with Vanessa's rent?" "Everything," I said, advancing to the next slide, which displayed the property deed with my name clearly visible as the owner. "Because this is the building where Vanessa lives, and I'm not just her sister, I'm her landlord." Mom's fork clattered to her plate. Dad's wineglass froze halfway to his lips. Vanessa looked like she was about to vomit. "You see," I continued conversationally, "when Vanessa demanded that I pay her $2,400 monthly rent, she was essentially asking me to pay myself. When she threatened to tell everyone what kind of sister I was if I refused, she was threatening to expose me for not paying rent to myself on behalf of someone who had been violating her lease agreement for months." "That's impossible," Mom whispered. "Is it?" I asked, clicking to the next slide, which showed Vanessa's lease application with both our signatures. "Here's the lease agreement Vanessa signed 8 months ago. She's been my tenant this entire time, Mom. Every month, she writes a rent check that goes into my business account." Vanessa finally found her voice. "You're making this sound like I knew." "Didn't you?" I interrupted, clicking to a screenshot of her conversation with Jessica, where she'd mentioned that I owned the building. "Because according to your own roommates, unauthorized subtenants, you've known about my ownership for quite some time." Dad set down his wineglass with a sharp click. "Vanessa, is this true?" The trap was sprung. There was nowhere left for her to hide. The silence stretched for exactly 17 seconds. I know because I was watching the clock on my laptop screen. 17 seconds of absolute quiet, while 3 decades of family dynamics shifted on their axis. Dad spoke first, his voice barely above a whisper. "Vanessa, answer the question. Did you know Zoe owned your building?" Vanessa's eyes darted between our parents and me, calculating her options like a cornered animal. It's complicated." "No," I said firmly, clicking to the next slide showing her Venmo transactions from her subtenants. "It's actually very simple. You've been collecting $2,400 per month from 4 unauthorized people living in my 1-bedroom apartment, then demanding I pay your actual rent while you spend over $3,000 monthly on shopping and entertainment." Mom's face went through a spectrum of emotions: confusion, disbelief, and then dawning horror as the reality hit her. "You've been lying to us this whole time?" "I wasn't lying," Vanessa protested, her voice rising defensively. I really do need help with money. It's not my fault that Zoe owns the building. That's just a coincidence." "A coincidence?" I laughed, a harsh sound that made everyone at the table flinch. "Vanessa, you've known I owned your building for months. You told your subtenants. You've been planning the shakedown while simultaneously violating every major clause in your lease agreement." I clicked through a series of slides showing her illegal subletting advertisements, the property damage from unauthorized pets, and the neighbor complaints about noise and overcrowding. 4 cats in a no-pet building, 5 people living in a 1-bedroom unit, parties until 2 a.m. on weeknights, late rent payments 4 times in 8 months, and through it all, you've been demanding that I, your landlord, pay your rent while you collect illegal income from people who have no legal right to live there. Dad's face had turned a dangerous shade of red. "Vanessa, is this true? Have you been lying to people about having permission to rent rooms in an apartment you don't own?" "It's not that simple, Dad. Zoe makes it—" "Answer the question," he exploded, his voice echoing off my dining room walls. "Have you been lying to people about having permission to rent rooms in an apartment you don't own?" Vanessa's composure finally cracked. "Yes, okay, yes, but only because I couldn't afford the rent on my own, and Zoe never told me she owned the building when I applied. Because I specifically instructed my property manager to treat you like any other applicant. I wanted to keep business and family separate. I didn't give you special treatment when you applied, and I didn't give you special treatment when you started violating your lease agreement." Mom was staring at Vanessa like she'd never seen her before. "You've been taking money from people under false pretenses while asking us to pressure Zoe into paying your bills?" "I needed the money," Vanessa shouted, abandoning any pretense of calm. "Do you have any idea how expensive it is to live in this city? I work 40 hours a week and can barely afford groceries. You spent $400 on a single dinner last Tuesday. You bought a $1,200 purse 3 weeks ago. You took a weekend trip to Vail that cost more than most people's monthly salary. This isn't about necessity, Vanessa. This is about wanting to live beyond your means while forcing other people to subsidize your choices." The evidence kept coming. Photos of her expensive purchases, screenshots of her social media posts bragging about her lifestyle, bank records showing her spending patterns. Each slide was another nail in the coffin of her victim narrative. "And here's the best part," I said, reaching the final section of my presentation. "While you've been running an illegal rental operation out of my property, you've been telling our entire family that I'm heartless for not helping you. You've convinced Mom and Dad that my refusal to pay your rent makes me a bad daughter." I clicked to screenshots of the text messages from family members, the social media posts about my supposed selfishness, the coordinated pressure campaign she'd orchestrated. "You turned our family against me to cover up your own criminal behavior," I continued, my voice steady despite the rage burning in my chest. "You made Mom cry because she thought I'd forgotten my values. You made Dad question how he raised me. You turned family dinners into guilt sessions about my moral obligations to you." Mom was crying now, mascara running down her cheeks. "How could you do this to your sister? To us?" "I didn't do anything to anyone," Vanessa shouted, standing up from the table so abruptly that her chair fell backward. "This is Zoe's fault for not telling me she owned the building. If she'd been honest from the beginning, none of this would have happened." The victim blaming was so automatic, so reflexive, that I almost admired its audacity. "So it's my fault that you lied on your rental application?" I asked calmly. "My fault that you've been running an illegal boarding house? My fault that you've been collecting money from people under false pretenses? My fault that you damaged my property and violated every major clause in your lease?" "You could have helped me," she screamed. "You're my sister. You're supposed to take care of me." "I'm supposed to enable your lies and criminal behavior because we share DNA?" I stood up, facing her across the table. "I'm supposed to pay your bills while you exploit vulnerable people looking for housing? I'm supposed to let you turn my property into a slum while you live like an Instagram influencer on other people's money? Dad finally found his voice, and when he spoke, it was with a coldness I'd rarely heard from him. Vanessa, sit down, right now. She sat, her defiance wilting under his tone. You've been lying to us for months. You've been exploiting people who trusted you. You've been manipulating your family and destroying your sister's reputation to cover up your own bad choices. And worst of all, Mom added, her voice breaking, you've made us complicit in pressuring Zoe to enable behavior we never would have supported if we'd known the truth. Vanessa looked around the table desperately, searching for any ally, any remaining source of support. Finding none, she played her final card. Fine, she said, her voice turning cold and calculating. I did know Zoe owned the building. I've known for months. And you know what? I don't care. She owes me this. I'm family. I shouldn't have to worry about rent when my sister is rich enough to buy entire buildings. The admission hung in the air like a toxic cloud. She just confessed to months of deliberate deception, manipulation, and exploitation while simultaneously claiming she was entitled to it all because of our family relationship. Mom stared at her youngest daughter as if seeing a stranger. Who are you? She whispered. It was a question that would haunt all of us for a very long time.
The aftermath of Vanessa's confession was swift and devastating. Within minutes, the family dynamics that had defined our relationships for 3 decades lay in ruins around my dining room table. Dad was the first to move, standing up with the careful control of someone trying not to explode. Vanessa, you're going to fix this. All of it, starting right now. Fix what? She asked, though her earlier defiance had crumbled into something that looked suspiciously like fear. You're going to call those people you've been lying to and tell them the truth. You're going to help them find legitimate housing. And you're going to pay back every penny you've collected under false pretenses. I can't afford to pay them back. That's the whole point. Then you'll figure it out, Dad said coldly. Because the alternative is your sister pressing charges for fraud, property damage, and whatever other laws you've broken. And after what I've heard tonight, I wouldn't blame her. The mention of criminal charges seemed to shock Vanessa into a new level of reality. She looked at me with something approaching genuine fear. You wouldn't really press charges against your own sister, would you? I considered the question seriously. 2 hours ago, I would have said no, but 2 hours ago, I thought you were just irresponsible with money, not running a criminal enterprise out of my property while manipulating our family to cover your tracks. Mom was sitting perfectly still, staring at her hands folded in her lap. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely audible. I called your Aunt Isabel yesterday. I told her how proud I was that you were helping Vanessa, how it showed what kind of person we'd raised you to be. The pain in her voice was devastating. Mom! She called our parish priest, she continued, still not looking up. I asked him to pray for families in our situation, where financial success might create distance between siblings. I was worried that your money was making you forget about family obligations. Each word was like a physical blow. My mother had been questioning my character, my values, my commitment to family, all based on lies Vanessa had told to manipulate the situation. I even called your grandmother, Mom whispered, finally looking up with tears streaming down her face. I told her that I was worried about you becoming selfish because of your success. Your own grandmother thinks you're heartless because I believed your sister's lies. Vanessa had the grace to look ashamed, but she still couldn't resist trying to minimize the damage. Mom, I never asked you to call anyone. You didn't have to ask, Mom exploded, finally showing the anger that had been building beneath her shock. You knew exactly what you were doing when you told us Zoe was refusing to help family. You knew we would pressure her. You counted on it. And it worked, I added quietly. I've spent weeks questioning my own values because my family thought I was being selfish. I considered actually paying your rent just to stop the guilt and manipulation. Dad was pacing behind his chair, working through the implications. How many people know about this situation? How many people think Zoe just heartless because of your lies? Vanessa mumbled something inaudible. Speak up, Dad demanded. I posted about it on Facebook, and I talked to some people at church, and maybe mentioned it to a few coworkers? Mentioned what, exactly? That my successful sister was refusing to help with my rent, even though she could easily afford it. I felt my last reserves of patience evaporate. So not only have you been running a criminal operation out of my property, you've been publicly destroying my reputation to cover your tracks. It's not criminal, I interrupted. Fraud is criminal. Taking money under false pretenses is criminal. Subletting without authorization is a civil violation that could become criminal depending on the amounts involved. And all of this while deliberately damaging my property and violating multiple lease clauses. I walked to my laptop and opened a new document. Here's what's going to happen. You have 48 hours to tell Jessica and your other illegal subtenants the truth about their housing situation. You'll help them find legitimate apartments and return their security deposits.
I don't have their security deposits anymore, Vanessa said quietly. Then you'll figure out how to get the money, Dad said firmly. Sell your car, sell your designer clothes, get a second job, whatever it takes. You'll also pay for all property damage, I continued. The estimate is $8,400, and that's just for the obvious stuff. If we find additional problems during the complete inspection I'm ordering, those costs are yours too. I don't have $8,000. Again, not my problem. You created this mess. You'll fix it. Mom was shaking her head in disbelief. How did you become this person, Vanessa? We raised you better than this. You raised her to believe that other people's success created obligations to her, I said, surprising myself with the insight. Every time someone in our family did well, it became a family discussion about how they should share. When Diego got his promotion, suddenly everyone had opinions about his spending. When Aunt Isabel inherited money, it became a referendum on family loyalty. I looked around the table at the wreckage of our family dinner. We taught Vanessa that success was something to be guilty about, something that created debts to everyone else. So when I became successful, she saw it as money that rightfully belonged to her. That's not... Mom started to protest, then stopped. The pattern was too obvious to deny. It is true, Mom, and I'm as guilty as anyone because I went along with it. I gave her money in the past without asking questions. I let family guilt override my better judgment. I enabled this behavior by treating success like something I owed apologies for. Vanessa was crying now, but they weren't tears of remorse. They were tears of self-pity. So what happens now? You're going to destroy my life over some stupid rent money? You destroyed your own life, Dad said flatly. You destroyed your relationship with your sister. You destroyed your mother's peace of mind. You exploited innocent people who trusted you. You turned our family into unwitting accomplices in your lies. And you did it all while living in luxury funded by criminal activity. The only question now is whether you're going to take responsibility and try to make amends, or whether you're going to keep playing victim while everyone else cleans up your mess. She looked around the table one more time, searching for sympathy, for someone to save her from the consequences of her choices. Finding none, she grabbed her purse and stood up. Fine, you win, but don't expect me to thank you for destroying my life. I didn't destroy your life, Vanessa, I said as she headed for the door. I just stopped letting you destroy mine. She slammed the door hard enough to rattle the windows. In the silence that followed, the three of us sat at the table, trying to process the magnitude of what had just happened. I'm so sorry, Mija, Mom finally said. I should have questioned her story. I should have known you wouldn't abandon family without good reason. We all believed what we wanted to believe, I replied. But now we know the truth. The question is what we do with it. Dad reached across the table and squeezed my hand. What we do is support you in whatever decisions you make next, and we make sure this never happens again. Outside, Denver's city lights twinkled in the darkness, indifferent to the family drama that had just unfolded. But for the first time in months, I felt something I'd almost forgotten. Peace. The truth was finally out, and I was free.
3 weeks later, I sat in my office watching the Denver sunrise paint the mountains pink and gold, reflecting on how dramatically my life had changed since that explosive dinner. The immediate aftermath had been messy, complicated, and painful, but ultimately necessary. Vanessa had followed through on exactly none of her promises. Instead of telling her subtenants the truth, she'd simply disappeared. Jessica called me in a panic on Monday morning when Vanessa stopped responding to texts and her belongings vanished from the apartment over the weekend. The 4 illegal occupants found themselves suddenly homeless with no explanation, no return security deposits, and no legal recourse. I'd spent Tuesday morning meeting with Jessica and the other displaced tenants at a coffee shop, explaining the real situation and helping them understand their options. It was heartbreaking to watch their faces as they realized they'd been victims of an elaborate scam, but necessary for them to protect themselves going forward. "I can't believe she just left us hanging like this," Jessica had said, tears in her eyes. "We trusted her. We thought we had a home." I'd helped them file complaints with the district attorney's office for fraud and connected them with legal aid services. More importantly, I'd used my real estate contacts to help them find legitimate housing arrangements. It was the least I could do for people who'd been exploited by someone who shared my name. The property damage to Unit 4B had been worse than Kevin's initial assessment. Once we'd completed the full inspection, the restoration costs climbed to $12,000. 4 cats in a 1-bedroom apartment for months had created problems that went beyond surface damage. We'd found structural issues with subflooring that required complete replacement. My lawyer, Priya, had been blunt about my options. "You have grounds for criminal charges, civil recovery, and immediate lease termination. The question is, what outcome you actually want?" What I wanted was closure and the assurance that the situation would never repeat itself. Criminal charges would take years to resolve and wouldn't recover the money. Civil court might eventually yield a judgment, but collecting from someone who'd already demonstrated complete financial irresponsibility seemed unlikely. Instead, I'd chosen a different path. I'd had Vanessa's belongings professionally packed and placed in storage, with the bill sent to our parents' address. I'd changed the locks on Unit 4B and begun the restoration process. And I'd sent a formal letter to Vanessa's last known address detailing the total damages and offering her one final opportunity to make things right before I pursued legal action. The letter had been returned as undeliverable. Vanessa had effectively vanished, leaving a trail of financial and emotional damage in her wake. But the most significant changes hadn't been legal or financial. They'd been personal. My relationship with my parents had undergone a complete transformation. The guilt, obligation, and unspoken expectations that had colored our interactions for years had been replaced by honest communication and mutual respect. Dad called me every Sunday now, not to deliver lectures about family responsibility, but to ask about my business, my goals, and my happiness. He'd started reading real estate investment books, genuinely curious about the work I'd been doing for years, while he assumed my success was somehow accidental. "I am proud of what you've built, Mija," he'd told me during our last conversation. "I should have said that years ago instead of treating your success like something to be managed or shared." Mom had been more direct in her transformation. She'd called every person she'd spoken to about my supposed selfishness, family members, church friends, and even my grandmother, and corrected the record. It must have been humiliating to admit she'd been wrong, but she'd done it anyway. "I won't let your sister's lies damage your reputation," she'd said firmly. "People need to know the truth about what kind of person you really are." The broader family response had been mixed, but ultimately clarifying. Some relatives expressed shock and support, apologizing for their role in pressuring me based on false information. Others seemed uncomfortable with the revelation that their understanding of family dynamics had been completely wrong. A few family members, particularly those who'd benefited from the old system of treating success as communal property, had grown distant since the truth came out. Uncle Carlos had stopped calling altogether after I'd politely declined his suggestion that I help Cousin Diego with his student loans since you're doing so well and family helps family. The old guilt tactics didn't work anymore because I'd finally understood something crucial. Enabling irresponsible behavior wasn't helping anyone. It was creating dependency, resentment, and a twisted sense of entitlement that ultimately damaged relationships.
My business had actually benefited from the clarity and boundaries I'd established. Without the constant drain of family drama and financial manipulation, I'd been able to focus entirely on growing altitude real estate holdings. I'd closed on 2 new properties in the past month and was negotiating for a third. More importantly, I'd implemented new policies for all my properties that would prevent situations like Vanessa's from developing again. Surprise inspections, stricter enforcement of lease terms, and immediate consequences for violations. My other tenants appreciated the professionalism and consistency. Apparently, most people preferred clear expectations to family favoritism. Jessica had become an unexpected friend through the process. She'd found a great apartment through one of my referrals and had started working as a part-time property scout for my business. Her experience with Vanessa's scam had given her a sharp eye for red flags in rental situations. "You know what's weird?" she'd said during our last coffee meeting. "I'm actually grateful this happened. Not for the money I lost, but because it taught me to ask better questions and trust my instincts. I'll never be that naive again." Her resilience had inspired me to start a small side project, a workshop series for young renters about tenant rights, lease agreements, and how to avoid rental scams. If Vanessa's deception could prevent other people from being exploited, maybe some good could come from the damage she'd caused. The most profound change had been internal. For the first time in my adult life, I was living without the constant undercurrent of family guilt about my success. I could enjoy my accomplishments without wondering what obligations they created or who might feel entitled to share them. I'd learned to distinguish between helping family and enabling destructive behavior, between being generous and being exploited, between family loyalty and family manipulation. The apartment felt different now, lighter somehow, as if removing the burden of other people's expectations had actually changed the physical space. I'd redecorated the dining room, replacing the formal table where so many guilt-laden conversations had taken place with a comfortable seating area, perfect for genuine gatherings with people who actually wanted to spend time together. As I finished my morning coffee and prepared for another day of building something I was proud of, my phone buzzed with a text from Mom. "Your father and I would love to take you to dinner this weekend. No agenda, no family drama, just celebrating our successful daughter and the amazing life she's built." I smiled, typing back, "I'd love that. Let's go somewhere nice. My treat." For the first time in years, that offer came from joy rather than obligation. The difference was everything. Some families are bound by love and mutual support. Others are held together by guilt, manipulation, and false obligations. I'd finally learned the difference, and it had set me free to build the kind of relationships and the kind of life I actually wanted. The mountains glittered in the morning sun, full of promise for whatever came next.
Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.